thankful to our two guests that are here from Washington, D.C., and our brother Hassan Shibley, who's here from via Skype from Tampa, Florida. I think that's where he is. So tonight's program is the topic of which is going to be, broadly speaking, civil rights and civil liberties of Muslims in the United States. The brothers here have a lot of examples and things that they can share with you that'll probably be of concern to you and folks in the Muslim community in the United States. We've certainly tailored the presentation, obviously, to those types of things. I want to encourage all of us to be as candid as we can be with this rare opportunity we have to have. I'll give you these guys' biographies quickly in a second, and you'll appreciate the extensive knowledge that these two brothers have and how unique it is for us to have the ability to ask questions in a forum like this of folks that have the credibility they have to answer them. So I would encourage all of you, if you have questions, you'll have an opportunity towards the end to ask those questions, and I hope you will ask those questions. In asking those questions, and I'm going to sit down in a second, I promise. In asking those questions, we do need to be mindful of the fact that we do have a limited period of time. Hopefully everyone will be fairly concise with what they have to say, and let's not make a lot of statements if you could, and make it more in the form of questions. Otherwise, we'll have to kind of transfer the microphone a little bit. The format of tonight's event, inshallah, will be Brother Hassan Shibley will speak for a few minutes to introduce the program, and then the two brothers here will take it from there. And let me very quickly, if I have my materials here. Obviously, I don't really need to introduce Hassan Shibley. I don't think most of you probably know him. He's been here before. He's a lawyer. He's the executive director of CARE Florida. Has appeared on many national publications, international publications, on many national television stations, etc. Has a long history of dealing with Muslim civil rights in the United States. And I think most of you know him, but I will get to the other speakers who are visiting. The first, the one we have here closest to me, is Kareem Shura. Kareem is a senior policy advisor and section chief of the community engagement section of the United States Department of Homeland Security through its Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties in Washington, D.C. In his position, Shura serves as a key expert and advisor representing the department at very high-level meetings with executives from various agencies, congressional staff, and other non-governmental organizations. Brother Kareem is a member of several interagency task forces that are currently responsible for leading the United States government's efforts at countering violent extremism. He joined the Department of Homeland Security in October of 2009 after a 10-year tenure with the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee, the ADC, where he served as legal advisor, legal director, and its national director. So he's been dealing with these types of issues for quite a long time. His experience includes serving as a guest lecturer at places a long list. For example, Yale University School of Law, #1 law school in the world, has been published by numerous leading national and international public policy journals, frequent guest in Al Jazeera, Al Arabiya, BBC, numerous American television programs, primarily to discuss civil rights and immigration and national security policy, things like that. He was born in Damascus, Syria, fluent in Arabic, spent much of his childhood in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, and is a native of Huntington, West Virginia. Graduated from Marshall University, holds a law degree from West Virginia University, and a Master's of Laws degree from American University. And there's a lot more to say about it, but we need to move on, so I'm going to go to the next gentleman. Haris Taran is also with us tonight. He's also a senior policy advisor at the Department of Homeland Security in the same Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. He was formerly the director of the Muslim Public Affairs Council, MPAC, through which service he gained a lot of, obviously, policy advocacy experience. He is a regular also, probably previous to his employment with the government anyways, he's more of a regular on various television programs, including CNN, BBC, Fox News, and MSNBC. He also writes regularly in national and international publications like the Washington Post, LA Times, Christian Science Monitor, and Al Jazeera. He's testified before various commissions on civil rights relative to communities that are facing challenges post 9/11. Interestingly, President Obama has personally recognized Harris for his work on national security, community building, and impacting policy via a personal phone call, which had to be pretty cool, as well as through subsequent meetings and press releases by the White House. He's the author of a book called Rethinking the Red Line, The Intersection of Free Speech, Religious Freedom, and Social Change, which is published by Brookings Institution. He is of Afghani descent, is fluent in Dari, which I understand is the most common language in Afghanistan, as well as Arabic. and he's currently pursuing his master's degree in international relations at Georgetown University. So I will take it from there, and we'll turn it over to Hassan Shibli if he can hear us. Unfortunately, he's not able to see us, but I think we can all see him. And Hassan, if you can hear me, if you want to take it from here, and then we'll turn it to the panelists, inshallah.
Sure. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Can everybody hear me okay?
Inshallah.
All right. Bismillah, alhamdulillah, wa salatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, ashhadu an la ilaha illallah, ashhadu anna Muhammadan abduhu wa rasuluh. Jazakumullah khairan for inviting me, allowing me to participate in this great program. I really wish I could be there with all of you in person. Birmingham has become like a second home to me by this point. And I apologize I couldn't for the last 2 months. I've been traveling non-stop, and unfortunately I had 2 commitments I couldn't get out of this weekend. And in fact, this is the first weekend I've had in Tampa in about 2 months, so I actually appreciate the break. As we saw due to the events of this last week, the need for the American Muslim community to be engaged with our neighbors and offer a counter narrative to that which is being promoted by extremists has never been more critical. Unfortunately, with the events of this last week and what happened in Texas, as has been said now by many in the media, even the conservative media, there's only been 2 winners in the last week. And that's been extremist, those who call themselves Muslim extremist groups, and anti-Muslim extremist groups who can both have worked hard to promote division and hate and can point the finger at each other, where you have groups like ISIS, Daesh, who can point at America and say, look, America is against Islam and against our faith, and where you have Pamela Geller, who can point at Islam and say, look, Muslims are all extremists and radicals. And so they reinforce each other, and that's why, in light of the very horrible events that we've been witnessing, not just this week, but over the past several months and continuing, it's very important that the mainstream American Muslim leadership actually hold on to the deen even stronger, hold on to the Sunnah even stronger, hold on to the Sharia even stronger, and while doing that, engage society, engage government, engage the media, give back to society, serve society, contribute positively to society, so people can see the beauty of our faith, and we don't allow our faith to be hijacked by extremist groups, whether they're Muslim or anti-Muslim extremist groups. That being said, I want to welcome Haris and welcome Kareem. Had the privilege of working with Kareem for quite some time. And actually, when I first learned that Huda had left her family and went to travel to Syria and joined that very horrible group, and we talked about that event in details when I visited a couple weeks ago, Kareem was actually the first person I called upon the request of the family. And the reason I called Kareem is he's had extensive experience in working in similar situations. And in fact, Kareem was very willing to help work with us at the Department of Justice and the Department of Homeland Security to even facilitate a way to possibly bring Huda back and maybe even avoid the most serious criminal charges that she might have been facing. I mean, the government was willing to work with us on these points, but unfortunately she herself wasn't as receptive, and that's why nothing came of it. And it's interesting because I actually called Kareem a few weeks ago when news broke out about it and became very public what happened. And I told him, I said, Kareem, one of my biggest concerns is now I hear members of the community in Birmingham saying they don't want to be as involved with the MSA or with the masjid, or they're afraid to be involved now because of all the scrutiny that's going to be upon them from the media, from the government. And Kareem was visibly upset. Actually, over the phone, I could tell he was very concerned about that. He said, no, we need the exact opposite. We need Muslims to be more involved so that we can reclaim the image of our faith in our community, both for other Muslims and for the public as a whole. And he gave a very strong message, which I really wanted him to share with the Birmingham community, that we should never be discouraged to be involved in our masjid, in MSAs, in civic groups. Rather, if anything, the events of the past few weeks should motivate us to be more involved so that we can truly reflect the beauty that our faith is. So I do want to thank Kareem for coming out. We've worked with him very closely on a lot of civil rights issues. I consider him a dear friend, and I'm also looking forward now to working with Haris in his new position. I want to welcome them to Birmingham. Thank them for coming up, and we really look forward to learning more, inshallah, about protecting civil rights and strengthening American Muslims engagement. So Jazakallah khairan, and hopefully we have a very beneficial night.
Jazakallah khairan. Thank you very much for that. And I failed to mention that after they finish, I think you guys are going to go 30 to 45 minutes or however long to go through your presentation on the PowerPoint. We will have time for questions and answers. It's probably best that we hold questions until that time so they can get through what they want to present. But then at that point, we do have a microphone there for the sisters. I'll probably give him this microphone, and we'll have the cordless microphone that we can take brothers in the crowd. So in a few minutes, you'll have a chance to ask questions. Be thinking about those questions, inshallah.
Assalamu alaikum. Homeland Security. When you hear that word, what comes to mind? Please volunteer. Don't be shy. Yes? FBI?
Immigration.
Immigration? Spying? Sorry?
Stay away from them.
Stay away from them. Okay. We'll go back home then.
Plead the fifth.
Sorry?
Plead the fifth. Plead the fifth. Plead the fifth.
Plead the fifth. Okay. Yes, sir.
Environment. Environment.
Empowerment?
Environment.
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 Oh, environment. Okay. That's interesting. Well, these questions, some are very, very accurate. Some are based on misperceptions. So we're here to really explain how we can help. Because as Brother Hassan said, there's a lot of misconception about us as Muslim Americans. In government, in society, on the media, in different forums. And I've seen it firsthand. My friend Horace has seen it firsthand. I've spent 12 years now, actually 10 years of my career before joining government, and the past 6 years within government, trying to address this issue from a civil rights perspective. The message that we want to send as part of this conversation is that any weakness in our society, anyone who feels vulnerable in society, doesn't matter if you're a Muslim American, or doesn't matter about your faith, or your gender, or your background, or your race, or your ethnicity. From our perspective, the U.S. government perspective, and I can speak for my department only, the Department of Homeland Security, any weakness in any of those, if you feel vulnerable, if you feel that your rights are violated, is in fact a weakness of our Homeland Security. So I see that you didn't get a chance to pick up the folders in the back, but when you do, you'll see a small booklet, very small booklet, in each one of those folders. I encourage you to take them, please. That's the United States Constitution. That's the guiding document for what this country is about. As far as we're concerned, Homeland Security is about protecting that document and what's inside, what it means, and what it stands for. And any erosion of the rights and liberties afforded under that document against anyone is an erosion of our Homeland Security. So the question is, why are a couple of guys in suits flying in from Washington, D.C. on a Friday night to Birmingham, Alabama, to a masjid, to talk to the community? It's because of that very fact. Since 9/11, at least since 9/11, it's been well documented that the Muslim American community, and other communities as well, have faced challenges related to civil rights and civil liberties. There is no question about that. And from a Homeland Security perspective, as I said, those challenges, that weakness and that link in society is a Homeland Security concern, because it's a violation of what this country stands for. So, Homeland Security as a department was started as a result of 9/11. It's the only federal government agency that was started because of a single incident in the history of the country. They've never actually, the government, Congress, the president, have never launched a cabinet-level department because of one incident. But DHS was it. So it came into being in the Homeland Security Act in March of 2003. after Congress passed the bill. The one unique part of Homeland Security is it's the only federal department, when it was passed, that actually includes an Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. And its mandate, and its actual mandate, if you look at the Homeland Security Act that created DHS, it actually says it's designed to ensure that civil rights and civil liberties are not diminished. So it is a guiding principle of the actual function of the entire department. Now, DHS is very large, an extremely large agency. Even though it's the youngest agency in the federal government, it's the second largest agency after the Department of Defense. It's composed of 22 agencies operationally. And by the way, the FBI is not one of those agencies. They're actually under the Justice Department. And about 220,000 employees. It's responsible for transportation security, for immigration enforcement, customs enforcement. Secret Service is part of it. The U.S. Coast Guard is part of it. The Federal Emergency Management Agency, FEMA, is part of it. So if there's a hurricane that hits the Gulf Coast, when you hear about FEMA being deployed, that's part of Homeland Security. It is not all about man-made disasters. It's designed to coordinate efforts on all disasters, man-made or natural, at the federal level that this country may face. So going back to my question, and please engage me in this conversation. Why are a couple of guys in suits from Washington, D.C. flying to Birmingham, Alabama on a Friday night to a masjid to talk to the community? Any ideas? Yes, sir, in the back. Because somebody joined ISIS, Daesh? Not really, but nice guess. We can talk about that, but nice guess. Remember, we're the Office for Civil Rights and Civil Liberties. Yes, sir, in the green shirt.
Yeah, I believe that y'all are here to try to develop some kind of understanding of the people with language and religion, and trying to give everybody justice.
Absolutely. It's actually what Hassan talked about. It's actually what Hassan talked about. And he wasn't exaggerating the fact that we're friends. We actually are good friends, and we've worked together on a number of issues in the past and ongoing. But going back to the first point I made, and this is often not translated when people encounter Homeland Security. Because when you encounter Homeland Security, you're encountering us in the airport with TSA, when you're traveling internationally with CBP, when you're processing your immigration work with USCIS. But the entire mission of the department is designed to build a cohesive society that's as transparent as possible and that's as resilient as possible. And if anyone feels that they're being impacted in a negative way as a result of these efforts, it actually is counterproductive to those very efforts that I'm talking about. Please go ahead, Haris.
Assalamu alaikum, everyone. I actually want to go back to the point that gentleman in the back about ISIS. Yes, what's your name? Ma. I want to say something about what you mentioned. I think it's important.
Louder?
Louder.
Oh, is it better? Is this better? I think it's important to address your point. You mentioned that we're here because someone joined ISIS. That's not. You cannot hear. Sorry. You mentioned that we're here because someone joined ISIS. That's not the reason we're here. But it is an impetus for us coming out and having a conversation. Because what happens, unfortunately, when an incident like that happens, and this is why Hassan reached out to Kareem, when an incident like that happens, there's public scrutiny that comes around the community when that takes place. And with public scrutiny comes what? Abuse of civil rights. By who?
By regular Americans.
There could be law enforcement. Who else? I think you mentioned something.
Regular people.
Average citizens who might have a misunderstanding. So I think that's important. We are here, I think one of the reasons that Hassan asked us to come out and we had this conversation was that you understand that when Kareem talked about resiliency, Homeland Security, that our mission is to ensure that everyone in the community feels safe and secure. And part of feeling safe and secure is ensuring that your civil rights are protected, and that if you have grievances or issues, whether against the government or any other entity that you interact with, that you feel that you're safe and secure enough to address those grievances. That is the mandate of the Civil Rights Division. The Civil Rights Office is actually for all the different departments, especially the Department of Justice. Their Civil Rights Division was established by an act of Congress as well. And this was the time when the Civil Rights Act was passed, when people like Martin Luther King and others were trying to ensure that the rights of the African American community were protected in places like Birmingham, Alabama, and around the country. And so the Congress actually passed the Civil Rights Act. And part of the Civil Rights Act was to establish a Civil Rights Division within the Department of Justice. We also, at the Department of Homeland Security, have a Civil Rights Division to ensure, and as Kareem mentioned, we have 22 component agencies. We probably act with the average American more than any other agency, federal agency. And I think if you can go into that.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned TSA, the airport security. They actually interact with 2 million people every single day. Every single day. 2 million people. That's just one agency. And no, that's not the largest one. CBP is the largest one. They interact with a lot more. So why are we engaging with community? And are we coming just to masjids? Do we just travel from Washington to masjids and talk to Muslims? No.
That would be
We do this. Sorry.
That would be a cool job.
That would be a cool job, but that would not be a fair job. That would be profile. We interact with all diverse communities all over the country. Behind me you see a map of the United States. And on that map, it's actually slightly outdated. We have a slightly newer one. But you see a number of major cities that are included, highlighted. The closest one I think to here is Atlanta, Georgia. We run something called a community engagement mechanism for DHS out of the Civil Rights Office. And our job is to interact with the American public to see how DHS is impacting people's rights in a negative way, and how we can fix those issues when we learn about them. That's how we learn about the problems, by interacting with people. So while today we're in a masjid, next week we may be in Denver, Colorado in a Catholic church, or not necessarily in a faith-based setting. Sometimes we go to schools, sometimes we go to community centers, depending on the issues, depending on the challenges. We don't always get invited by Hassan Shibli, but it's always good to be invited by Brother Hassan. So behind me you see these cities. There's about 14 cities that are marked. In those cities we actually run a regular mechanism where we invite different diverse communities, all kinds of communities, to join us 4 times a year in a roundtable, a big conversation with all the different agencies, DHS agencies, as well as the Justice Department, U.S. Attorney's Office, the FBI sometimes there, and other state and local agencies. And the idea is to be able to engage in an ongoing conversation. Why? For Homeland Security purposes, to address civil rights and civil liberties, to make sure that we're not violating the Constitution, to make sure that people's civil rights are protected, are defended when they raise the issues with us. So what does a roundtable look like? Well, this is one we did in 2011, just like you can imagine. This one was actually hosted by one of our agencies in Los Angeles. It's basically a whole of government approach to talking to the communities, to the American public, to society. Oftentimes, the government is blamed for not speaking with the public enough. Oftentimes, we're blamed for being very operational. Somebody mentioned the FBI earlier. You know, the FBI is the chief federal criminal investigative arm of the federal government. And so their job is to investigate crimes. So they will talk to you in that context. Oftentimes people interact on the immigration issues with USCIS, how to do naturalization, or how to practice your test to become a United States citizen. So what we bring to the table in these forums is, it's a whole of government approach. So if you have a question related to TSA, and you raise it just with USCIS, they're going to say, I'm sorry, I can't help you, you need to go talk to TSA. So guess what? TSA is actually around that table to try to address your questions. So what challenges do communities face in interacting with government? We are a nation of immigrants. We're one of the very few countries, and probably the chief one, as far as I know, that is composed primarily of immigrant generations. No one can claim that they're a Native American except the Native Americans. Everybody else is an immigrant, whether you came on, with Christopher Columbus or before him, or whether you were on a slave ship being transferred over to our country's shores because you came from Africa. It's the story of our country. We bring with us a lot of baggage. In my bio, Brother Lucas mentioned that I was born in Damascus, Syria. I was fortunate enough to come to this country much younger in age. I was only 14 years old when my parents immigrated to this country. But I can tell you, when I talked to my father, and someone mentioned the FBI, his son works for Homeland Security. But when somebody says the FBI, he cringes. Why? Anyone? Bad image.
They say, understand what we do from fear of authority.
Fear of authority. That's right, because back home in Syria, he knew that when you said FBI, they think mukhabarat, they think the secret police, they think the torture, they think the disappearances, etc. So I'm using myself as an example because I know how people feel when somebody says FBI, and I know what they bring with them from memory back home of what authority means, the fear of authority, the fear of the police, of law enforcement. So general apprehension, general fear of authority is actually a natural, and guess what? It doesn't stick to any one community. Many different communities from many different backgrounds have that fear and apprehension at varying level. So part of our job is to make sure we explain and understand and ensure the fact that the rule of law is the primary authority in this country. It's the rule of law under the United States Constitution. And if there is abuse, if there is discrimination, that rule of law ensures that it's addressed and protected and defended. There's a lot of concern related to hate crimes, stereotypes. The brother mentioned the incident in Texas last week. And we convened a phone call with a lot of communities down in Texas last week as a result. And there's apprehension, there's fear. People are concerned that now mosques are going to be attacked, that Islamic schools are going to be attacked. We were told by a lot of community leaders in the Dallas area that women wearing the hijab are afraid of going shopping. Some people did keep their kids home from school if they go to the Islamic school. We heard from our friends in Irving, Texas. They have a very large school with 560 students, and they said the rate the day after the attack was extremely low because of that fear and apprehension. So what are the certain grievances that people have? I mentioned the baggage that we bring with us sometimes with the apprehension of authority, apprehension of law enforcement. We also bring with us our own priorities, our own issues. That's what makes this country so unique, really. It's the mosaic of interests, the mosaic of beliefs that forms it. And Brother Hassan mentioned the need to be active, the need to be engaged. Both Haris and I have invested our lives in making sure we were engaged. We started our careers in this civil society. Haris with MPAC, me with ADC. You have to be engaged, you have to define yourself in this country. Otherwise, if we let it go, others will define you. Without going into too much detail, but we know what the extremists on both sides are trying to do. Whether it's people like Pamela Geller and her ilk, or whether it's Daesh and Al-Nusra and etc. and Shabab and their ilk. They've got the same goals. Their goals are to try to define us. So our job is to make sure that, no, we define ourselves. We define ourselves. And how do you define yourself? You define yourself by engagement. You define yourself by being members of organizations, whether it's on the advocacy side, like Hassan does with CARE down in Florida, or at the campus level with Muslim student associations on campus, or with youth groups, or being active in your masjid. There are a lot of ways of being involved. But even with that, we need to keep in mind that there are a lot of issues. We know there are a lot of issues, otherwise we'd be out of jobs. And so it's important for us to remain engaged. If you want to advocate on foreign policy, there are mechanisms for advocating on foreign policy. If you want to advocate on civil rights, there are mechanisms of advocating on civil rights. Don't be fearful. Don't be apprehensive. In a community like this one, and the brother in the back mentioned, because somebody went and joined Daesh, that creates a chilling effect. There's no question about it. People are gonna clamp down. People are gonna think, oh no, everybody's watching us now. The media wants to come and record what's happening in the mosque. Well, guess what? It's an open door. It's the community's mosque, just like a church or a temple or any house of worship. And so our job in this situation, when something like this does cause this chilling effect on the entire community at the local level, is to in fact stand up, open our doors, and say, this is who we are, and this is who we are not. I understand the apprehension. I was there after 9/11. I was working for a civil rights organization after 9/11. On that day, I still remember that Tuesday morning. It was a clear, crisp Tuesday morning in Washington, D.C. As the attacks were taking place, and I saw the smoke right outside of my office when the Pentagon was hit, when the plane hit the Pentagon. And I didn't answer the phone, but a colleague of mine in that office answered the first phone call. Very nasty threat. Very, very nasty threat. Basically, it was a threat that they're going to come and shoot up everybody in the office. And then you Muslims, you Arabs, this is war, etc. I was there when the police car showed up, and we had a police officer in our office stationed for the first 2 months after 9/11 because they were concerned of backlash. They were concerned that Muslims, Arabs, Middle Easterners, South Asians, even our friends in the Sikh community, were going to face backlash. And we did. But did we close shop and say, oh, that's it, we give up, we're going to let those who did whatever they did define us? Did we do that? We don't give up. We did not do that. In fact, we did a lot more after 9/11 than we were doing before 9/11. And I don't have to tell you, I know impacted probably 2,000% after 9/11 than they did before. And our friends at CARE probably tripled in size because of 9/11, because we stood up and we worked to define our identity and to protect our civil rights and civil liberties. So behind me, you see one of the different events that we do. In this case, our colleague, and he's actually behind the podium there, you probably can't see him very well, Abdelaziz Farah, is in a room at a hotel in Minneapolis, Minnesota. This was in 2010, if I remember correctly. And this was an event hosted by the Somali community in Minneapolis. And the brother mentioned Daesh and that unfortunate situation that took place in this community recently. The Somali community in Minneapolis back then was struggling with not just one incident. They were struggling with 23 different incidents. 23 different incidents of young men, high school, college-age young men, who would disappear from their homes. They would just disappear. Their parents didn't know, the community didn't know, they had no idea. And then they found out, unfortunately too late in some of the cases, on Facebook, on social media, that they were killed in Somalia fighting with Al-Shabaab. Community didn't know, the parents didn't know, no one had an idea. As a result, there was a lot of scrutiny placed on the Somali community in Minneapolis. A lot. The media, you can Google it if you weren't around, but I'm sure some of you remember what all the big, the headlines, the breaking news, Minneapolis, hotbed for terrorism, Shabaab headquarters, etc. So, as Horace referenced, these types of incidents do cause a problem. Not just with scrutiny, but with possible erosion of our rights. Part of the reason why we're here to hear from you about what you're experiencing, is to make sure that that scrutiny that this community is facing does not cause an erosion of your rights, because it should not. While we don't control the media, we most certainly control the DHS agencies, and we can definitely work with other federal agencies or state and local authorities if there are issues related to profiling, if there are issues related to immigration delays, if there are issues related to watch listing, or the TSA or CBP. That's our job to address. Now I'm going to take you to Denver, Colorado. November 2014, only a few months ago. There's a small town outside of Denver, Aurora, Colorado. A father texts his daughter. Every day, she's a high school student. She goes to school, he checks on her. So around lunchtime, he sends her a text. Baba, are you okay? Everything okay? And she texts back. That day in November, the father texted his daughter. She didn't answer. He waited. Maybe she's busy, she's in class. He waited an hour, 2 hours, kept texting. She doesn't respond. He texted his son, who's a younger student in the same school. Have you seen your sister? He said, no. My sister didn't come to school. I thought she was sick at home. She's not sick at home. So he called the school. Is my daughter there? Did she report? And they said, no. We thought she was sick at home. Obviously, as a father, he became very worried. He called the father of the best friend of that daughter. He said, can you please contact your daughter? He actually had 2 daughters in the school, and ask about my daughter. I can't find her. So the father sends a text to both of his daughters. Have you seen so-and-so? They don't answer. He calls the school. Can you please, I need to talk to my daughters on the phone. The school says they didn't report to school today. That father becomes very distressed. The first father was very quick acting, thinking, I guess. He had his younger son go to the daughter's laptop at home and look up what she was doing online. And he was able to look at the browsing history through his son, 12-year-old. And he became very distressed. So he called his member of Congress. That was his first call. Then he called the local police department and said, I'm worried about my daughter, she's missing. He followed, basically, she's missing. They contacted DHS, FBI became involved. Guess where they found the 3 girls? Any guess? I'm sorry?
They're at the airport in Germany.
They were 36,000 feet over the North Atlantic on a Lufthansa flight that took off from New York JFK Airport and was bound to Frankfurt, Germany. Fortunately, in this case, the US government was able to contact the German authorities, explain the situation. German authorities greeted them when they landed in Frankfurt and basically put them on the next flight back to Denver, Colorado. Those 3 young girls are safe at home with their families, and we realize that they're victims. Victims of the worst part. Victims of what? They were victims of online social predatory behavior. Online predatory behavior. We always warn our kids, I hope, those of us who are parents, about child predators online. Right? Unfortunately, somebody said Daesh or ISIS. Unfortunately, Daesh is following the same exact pattern of online predatory behavior. I was in Denver, Colorado 2 weeks after this happened. And I got to know a lot about the situation of those 3 young ladies. Those 3 young ladies were absolutely your average, normal high school students They were not in trouble. They were good in school. They were active with their community. They were good with their families. But apparently, in April of 2014, they were using different social media tools. And I'm not talking about Facebook or Twitter or Instagram. There are other tools that we don't even know about. Those of us who may be older, and I'm counting myself, I'm 42 years old. I don't know most of these tools that kids are using today. Kids as young as 6 and 8 years old, using their tablets or their little phones, are using communication tools, not for bad things. That's how they communicate with their peers. It's the new way of communicating. Which is, that's how the generation communicates. But because of that fact, we understood that those 3 young ladies were using those tools, and they got to know someone who was clearly intent on preying on them. And he was preying on them. He basically hooked them into a conversation. First, it was an innocent conversation about how there's suffering in the world, and then we started seeing videos of the horrible atrocities and war crimes that are happening in Syria today. And then it got worse. And those 3 girls became hooked with this one male personality who was basically, through these different online social media forums, and he would take them from one to the other, showing how phenomenal he is as a hero protecting the innocent people in Syria. Showing footage of heroism, chivalry, protecting against the barrel bombs and the chemical attacks and all we know that's happening. We don't know if it's true or not, because obviously everything on the internet could be fabricated. But they became hooked. They became so hooked that when he was allegedly killed and his colleagues took up his cause online, they were convinced that the best thing to do was not necessarily go and fight. I mean, they're 3 teenage girls, they can't fight. But just to come and live and help the good cause of helping these poor people who were victims of these horrible crimes that are taking place. The crimes, there's no question, are taking place. The atrocities are the worst since World War II. But that suffering is being misused to prey on these innocent young girls. The story in Denver, Colorado has been repeated in our country in varying ways over 180 times. Over 180 people so far have left our country and traveled to live or support Daesh, based out of Raqqa, Syria. And this number is actually small. Every country in the world has had these types of losses of young people who fell victim to this online predatory behavior. So the brother in the back, I sort of dismissed you initially when you said because somebody left for ISIS. Sir, you're absolutely correct. You're absolutely correct. As a Muslim American, that actually hurts me more every time I hear this happening over and over and over again, knowing fully well that our community, our mosques, our masjids, our schools, don't have the tools to tackle this. We need to develop the tools to tackle this. When we talk about defining ourselves, protecting our civil rights and civil liberties, making sure that no one else speaks on your behalf, especially during these types of sensitive times where we are being scrutinized. I know the community here in Birmingham, there's no question it's being scrutinized. Just like the community in Aurora, Colorado was being scrutinized back in November when I flew in and tried to work with them. How would you fix this problem? How do we develop? Hassan mentioned something very important. The US government can't fix this problem. No government can fix this problem. This goes back to basic, very basic, good parenting, good religious instructions. We're very capable of that. Extremely capable. Instilling the right values, making sure that our children understand that if they are frustrated with what they see, God knows I'm frustrated with what I see. If we're frustrated with our country's foreign policy, when it comes to Syria or elsewhere, there are ways to feel empowered enough to address those issues in a constructive way, to empower our community, to speak up in a constructive way. When someone like Pamela Geller engages in her stunts, publicity stunts, we need to feel empowered to define ourselves, not let the Pamela Gellers of the world or the Daeshes of the world try to define us. And I can speak credibly, not just because I work for this federal agency, but because I've invested my career in making sure the civil rights of our community is protected since 9/11. After 9/11, we faced a lot of challenges. Airlines were kicking us off of planes because of our names, or because of the way we looked, or because we had our passport said we were born somewhere. That was a major problem. The government was making us go through a special registration program, where if you were from certain countries, all of which happened to be Muslim countries, you had to go through extra steps to register with immigration and re-register with immigration. We had a lot of problems after 9/11. But I can tell you, with this experience I've had post 9/11, today, with the incident that I mentioned, and I gave you one case example only, and the fact that this community unfortunately has fallen victim to this because of what happened recently. Today is more critical to our community than the day after 9/11. Some may disagree with me, but I've seen it nationally. I've seen it locally. I've seen how the actual communities are being impacted. After 9/11, it was much more of a class issue. I mentioned our friends in the Sikh community, for example. They faced a lot of hate crimes after 9/11 simply because of the way they looked. They had turbans, they wore beard, and people were attacking them and unfortunately thinking they were Muslim, basically. But it was a core civil rights issue. Whereas today's issue is an issue of defining yourself and an issue of creating a narrative, creating the conversation to say, Pamela Geller or Daesh, you're both not defining me. I'm going to come up with my own program, with my own campaign, whether it's at the local micro level with a local NSA chapter on a campus, or whether it's a broader effort, working with the interfaith community, working with other communities, to make sure that people don't misunderstand what we're about. We were having a conversation earlier today with a few of the brothers about this conversation we're going to have here tonight. And we were talking about, what ways can we address this? And I remember mentioning something. I said, do most people know that the average Muslim American in this country actually has a higher education level and actually has a higher average income than the average American? Most people don't know that. Do people in Birmingham, Alabama, or Tuscaloosa, or Mobile, or anywhere in the state, do they know that Muslims are actually contributing more to the economy in the state of Alabama than the average person in Alabama? Most people don't know that. Is there a campaign by the Muslim American community to say, here's what we contribute to the state? That alone will help paint the accurate picture of what we are about as a community. And let's keep in mind, this is part of the American journey. We're not the first community to face this. How many of you are familiar with the Chinese exclusion laws? Raise your hand if you've heard of the Chinese exclusion laws. 1, 3. There was a time in our country's history where the Congress passed and the president signed a law that basically said, no more Chinese. We don't want Chinese in our country. That's it. Close the door, lock the door. Outright discrimination. But it happened. I don't have to tell you the African American experience, especially in Alabama. I hope everybody's familiar with that. Yet today, in Washington, D.C., you have an African American president, and you have a Secretary of Homeland Security, who's also African American. Their ancestors, I know for a fact the ancestors of Secretary Johnson, were brought on slave ships into this country. They were slaves in places like Alabama. And now he's the Secretary of Homeland Security. It's a long journey. It took a few decades, but it happened. And I would not put past anyone who would say, in the next 20 years, we're going to have a Muslim American president in the White House. That might be a sacrilege in certain circles, but it's every... Sorry? Sir, let's not promote rumors, Horace. Certain people believe that there's already one. But I am being serious. I am being serious. Empowering our children to know that they can grow up to be the President of the United States, that they can grow up to be the Secretary of Homeland Security, or the Attorney General, or the CEO of Coca-Cola. They can do that. Our children need to feel empowered and free to do that, because this is what this country is all about. And anyone who says otherwise is actually countering this country's homeland security as far as I'm concerned. Any bigot who says that a young Muslim American child, because they're Muslim American, has some sort of a glass ceiling is actually infringing on the homeland security of this country. Because by making this child feel weak or vulnerable, you're actually creating a vulnerability in our society. You're actually making us a weaker community and a weaker society. So, part of this effort, the fact that, and I'm very happy that Hassan actually called me, he mentioned the details of our conversations before, and the fact that he invited us down here with your gracious hospitality. Part of our effort is to make sure you feel that we have your back. We know this community is vulnerable. We know this community is under the spotlight. Please know that you have friends in government in Washington, D.C. here to serve you. We are your servants. We're civil servants, and our job is to serve you. So if you feel that you're being profiled or attacked or feeling discriminated against by anyone, please talk to us. The purpose of this conversation, and I'm sorry I stopped the PowerPoint, but I really want to engage in a discussion here. The purpose of this conversation is to make sure you understand, and trust me, I know about the lack of belief in authority or the lack of trust in law enforcement. I completely get that. But please know that we're here to help, and our jobs actually mandate us to try to help. We have our business cards. I will give you, each of you, a business card with my cell phone and email address. Feel free to contact me separately if you want to raise issues, if you face problems in the future. Horace, I know, wants to say a few words, but I really want to engage in a more in-depth conversation about how we can address the issues. Someone mentioned the FBI, someone mentioned immigration. There were some negative comments about the perception of Homeland Security. That's based on reality. I'm sure that is based on reality. I want to know what that reality is and how we can fix it. So please be, as the brother in the introduction said, be as candid as you can. Ask as many questions as you can. You need to give us a picture of how we can help, keeping in mind the unbelievable undue scrutiny we're facing as a community. I share in that with you. I totally get it. So how can we fix that to make sure that it doesn't impact us in a negative way? Inshallah, it has not already impacted us in a negative way here in Birmingham. But if it has, we need to try to fix it. So why don't we start with a Q&A?